Proto-Elysian area. And these ideas are arguably at least 20 years out of date now. Even if you don't accept parts or all of Wilson's models, they surely need to be addressed seriously and investigated archaeologically, and they have not. So that's my main message. Okay, when earlier scholars detected Melanesian influences in Eastern Polynesia, both phenotypically and culturally, we have to think, what is it that they were seeing? They were seeing something. Maybe they were just getting things wrong, but they saw something. Pre-World War II scholars, Carl von den Steinem, Catherine Routledge and Gladys Reichart, saw quite specific material cultural links to the Solomon Islands in Eastern Polynesia, but they had no way to interpret or understand what they saw. They had no model of settlement in that sense. Burroughs, 1938, mentioned by Peter Shepard, also saw some clear differences between Western and Eastern Polynesian cultures. And my favorite, as it was of Suggs and many other people, is the Uhikana of the Marquesas, which I find impossible to believe that this does not come from the Cap-Caps of the Solomon Islands, the Bismarck Archipelago, and New Guinea. These are, I mean, sadly, one's just a drawing and the other's a nice photograph from the British Museum, but these are the designs cut out in turtle shell, placed on a white shell background. I mean, okay, maybe you can make it up, but look at those two designs. They actually are the same design. Anyway, I'll leave that one with you. Robert Suggs in 1961. We should go back to him. I mean, he really was a genius guy. Rereading his work, I'm ever more impressed. Okay, the dates are all wrong, but he had a lot of very interesting ideas. And he did note that generally the early traditional evidence indicating possible Western Polynesian and Melanesian connections was suppressed, the implications of these data being overlooked. At the same time, in Polynesian anthropology as a whole, a certain insularity arose, with sharp boundaries being drawn between the Polynesians and neighboring peoples, while attention was focused on the interrelationships and dynamics of Polynesian cultures rather than on external connections. And if we can achieve nothing further at this conference than extending out the places we look to look for the origins of East Polynesian culture and later interactions, then we will have achieved something. Now, of course, Suggs did his archaeological research in the Marquesas, 1956 to 8. He believed that the Marquesas was settled 200 BCE, 200 BC, and that Polynesian settlement related to that of Melanesia was continuous and without a pause. So in his idea, connections to the Solomon Islands were not a problem because he saw a continuous settlement. So when people arrived in the Marquesas, as far as he was concerned, they hadn't come from Melanesia very long ago. So that's how he understood these ornaments, the house and early temple forms, shell knives, and adze forms. So he had a model. We know now that his settlement dates for the Marquesas were wrong by 1,000 years or more, but at least he had a model. Now, in 1997, when I wrote my book, The Island Melanesians, I was particularly struck by some evidence from early explorers, such as Surville. It's account of his 1769 visit. And he was talking about the island of Santa Isabel in the main Solomon's chain. And he talked about voyages that were taking place from Santa Isabel in the Solomons, 10 to 12 days sail to and he says, a nation much less black than his own, that he there changed black men for white, i.e. black slaves for white slaves, or Polynesian slaves, we would imagine, and brought back also fine cloths covered with designs. This regular exchange of slaves or war captives, I said, which accompanied the supply of fine bark cloth to Isabel, would explain the mixed population noted there by early European visitors, and why Mendana, who had been there in the same area 200 years before, was greeted with the Polynesian term for chief, Tauriki, they said, when they saw him. So these long-distance connections between Melanesia, island Melanesia, and some of the Polynesian either outliers or islands, I would think, beyond perhaps 10 to 12 day sail would get you to Kiribati or Tuvalu. It would get you way beyond Ontong Java or Luanua. Okay, around about 2013, I became aware of Bill Wilson's work. He'd been publishing since 1985 on this, and nobody seemed to be listening to him at all. And then I think in 2013, I saw his paper, Whence the Polynesians, Further Linguistic Evidence for a Northern Outlier Source. And in that, he claimed he had 73 linguistic innovations uniquely shared between Eastern Polynesian and the central northern outliers of the Solomon Islands, but not found in Samoan. And then later on, it became 130. As Mary told us, it's now 200 innovations. Now, all I would say is that, to knock down a few innovations should be fairly easy for a linguist. To knock down 200 is going to be a bit of a task for Mary, but I wish her well with it. And most recently, he's had 2 more major papers, which every archaeologist should read. I'm not saying you should believe it, but you should read it. It's serious stuff. And we heard from Peter about his model, Eastern Polynesia not settled directly from Samoa, but from the central northern outliers of the Solomons. I won't go through the linguistics. Luckily, everyone else has talked about it. Now, clearly, someone's been encouraging this guy. I don't know who he is, but, he's... in my defense, I would say, I was co-supervisor with Andy Pawley of Jeff Mark, and so I was already aware of talk of the atoll corridor as a possible factor between West and East Polynesia, and also the whole idea of Proto-Elysian. I've been encouraging Peter Wilson as an archaeologist because I think the ideas are important, they need to be debated, and they need to be out there. So if you want to blame anyone, you can partly, at least, blame me. Okay, the central northern outliers. There's, as I said with that quote from Surville, there's clearly contact between the main Solomons and the outliers or Polynesian islands much further to the east. And there is a single potsherd found on Ontong Java by Danny Miller in 1979, which I identified as being a Mararing sherd from Buka in the North Solomons, about 500 to 150 BP. Nobody has mentioned, including Bill Wilson, the Carteret Islands, Kili Nailau, which was clearly a Polynesian outlier until the last few hundred years, when it was conquered by Halia speakers from Buka, who killed all the men and married the women. So you can add another island to the place that archaeologically we should be looking at, which is the Carterets, which you can't see on this map, but you'll see on another map further on. I mentioned why I was enamored of Bill Wilson's ideas. Part of it is the Uhikana of the Marquesas and the Cap-Caps of the Solomons. I cannot believe that these are independent inventions. Also, the Surville quote, 10 to 12 days sail from Santa Isabel gets you way into Polynesia. And also, as Peter Shepard has pointed out in his fantastic article, one of the best archaeological articles I've read for years, that was in JPS this year, there's a lot of evidence of Micronesian influence passing down into the outliers and then potentially transmissible to the east. Now, this is Montenegro et al. Around the same time, 2014, the first paper on looking at these simulations of how you would get from West to East Polynesia. And I have to say that the graphics, whoever did the graphics in this, they really, some of the worst maps I've ever tried to follow. And I would say that I did actually contact, or try to contact Montenegro to point out that your ideas of a northern route to get to the east really fits with some of Wilson's ideas, but got no response. So, okay, here's a blow up of the map where I attempt to try and interpret it. The more yellow it is, the easier it is to sail to the east with the wind behind you rather than against you. And this is during El Nino summers. And you can see, I hope, where the Marquesas, the Southern Line Islands, and the Phoenix Islands are. And there really is a kind of corridor of which Samoa and those kind of islands are really on the edge of, that will get you to East Polynesia. So if you wanted sailing directions from, and you at the time when you actually had this information, it would have been head north, probably to the latitude of the central northern outliers, and then you can just truck on over to the east very quickly during the right weather conditions. Okay, I would note, I think Peter mentioned it briefly, that there is at least a suggestion from DNA work that's been done of a specific link in mitochondrial and Y chromosome lineages between Ontong Java, one of the central northern outliers, and the Leeward Society Islands in modern whole genome samples. So there's something suggestive in the genetics, as well as something suggestive in the sailing simulations, as well as something suggestive in modern material culture that might tend to support some of the ideas of Bill Wilson. Okay, now, the problem is no archaeologists have actually examined the question, so our opinions are all kind of slightly worthless. We need a research design. We need to look at this archaeologically. Now, some archaeology has been done on Nuku'oro and Kapingamarangi, which are part of the Federated States of Micronesia, done a long time ago by Janet Davidson and I think also Foss Leach and Graham Ward. But if we look at the atolls which are part of the autonomous region of Bougainville, Nuku'ria, no archaeological survey. Taku, no archaeological survey. Nukumanu, no archaeologists ever been there either. And also the Carterets, as I mentioned, the former Polynesian outliers, no archaeology done there. If we move just slightly south, 38 kilometers south of, not Nukumanu, Taku, isn't it? Yeah, no, it is Nukumanu. I was right first time. Ontong Java, again, no archaeological survey has been done. So it's a kind of perfect storm of non-archaeological work in the areas that Bill Wilson's identified as being the most important to look at. Okay, if we move across to where he believes that some early form of Proto-East Polynesian was spoken, he talks about the Phoenix, the Line Islands, and the Marquesas. Well, the Marquesas, obviously a lot of work being done there. Phoenix and Line Islands, in which I would include Howland and Baker, which is just slightly north of the map, and which are under American jurisdiction. There are early reports. There's a well-known one, I think, from 1862, talking about these islands which were uninhabited at European contact, but which had clear evidence that there had been people living there before. And if we go through the Phoenix Islands, I won't go through all of them, but, Howland, 2.6 square kilometers of land. There's archaeological sites there. I mean, pre-European archaeological sites. Baker, there's archaeological sites there. Enderbury, we don't know. No one's been there, I guess. McKean, we know there are archaeological sites there. Burney, we don't know, very small. Rawaki, Phoenix Island, we don't know. Manra, archaeological sites there. Annie Di Piazza and Eric Peartree worked there in the late 1990s. And then also Arona, archaeological sites. But no, apart from the work of Di Piazza and Peartree, no serious archaeological attention since, at best, the 1980s. The late, great Canale Shun did a survey of Howland, but he couldn't find any of these archaeological sites that Haig mentioned may well have been destroyed by guano mining or airstrip building, which is a big problem for several of these islands. If we move to the Northern Line Islands, Kingman doesn't count because it's just a reef. Palmyra, no archaeological survey done. Tabuaran or Fanning Island, some, again, Di Piazza and Peartree are the heroes of this story because they actually go out to these remote islands. Christmas Island, again, Di Piazza and Peartree and Athol Anderson and others. Jarvis, again, American jurisdiction, no archaeological survey ever done. The Southern Lines, archaeological sites are there. Archaeological sites on Malden, on Starbuck, not on Flint, but at least basalt artifacts have been found. So there are archaeological sites. So all of these either have archaeological sites, possibly abandoned around 1425 CE, which could be important, start of the Little Ice Age, maybe why people left, or they've never been surveyed. So my conclusions are that almost all Polynesian archaeologists seem to be in denial of even the possibility that Bill Wilson might be right. And it's sad that it needs a couple of Western Pacific archaeologists, Peter Shepherd and myself, to take these ideas seriously amid the deathly silence of you all. In general, geneticists too, such as Ioannidis et al. 2020, simply fail to include samples other than Samoa in their comparisons, and therefore contribute nothing to the debate on Polynesian origins. Absolutely nothing. If you don't include the samples that may be relevant, then of course you're going to get Samoa. So I'm not so impressed by the genetic work that's been done. Also, there are linguists who find Bill Wilson's ideas extremely problematic, like Mary, and she promised me last night she's just about to publish the massive refutation, so that would be really good. But so far, the linguists have been remarkably quiet. They haven't said, they might say it's wrong in conferences like this, but they haven't published the stuff. You've got to knock down 200 supposedly uniquely shared innovations, and good luck, good luck. Secondly, Polynesian archaeologists need to develop a comprehensive plan of research to investigate the various parameters of what Wilson is saying, because this is serious stuff. He's not a fringe figure. He's a serious linguist, and he's got a very interesting set of ideas. We need targeted work on the central northern outliers of the autonomous region of Bougainville and the Solomon Islands before sea level rise destroys the evidence and the cultures that live on them. Some of these islands are the most threatened in the world by sea level rise, and much of the populations of the Carteret Islands, for instance, have already been evacuated to the mainland of Bougainville because their islands are simply being washed away. And this is a problem with all of the outliers in the central northern Solomons. Also, we need further targeted work in the Phoenix and the Line Islands of Kiribati and the USA islands there, because there haven't really been any projects that I know of, and I stand to be corrected, until just after the start of this millennium, and no projects have been done since these ideas of Bill Wilson became more widely promulgated after about 2014. So, thank you.